Welcome back to Time Machine Diaries, the podcast where we rip open history's most batshit insane moments and let all the messy, bloody chaos spill out. I'm Amelia, your trusty time-traveling guide, and today we're diving headfirst into one of the wildest, most WTF uprisings of the 19th century. Now, if you've never heard of the Boxer Rebellion, buckle up. This isn't just another war or revolution. It's a fever dream mashup of kung fu mysticism, imperialist fuckery, and an epic battle for survival. Imagine a bunch of pissed-off peasants deciding they've had enough of foreign assholes carving up their country like it's a Thanksgiving turkey. They go full-on berserk, believing they're literally immune to bullets. Spoiler, they weren't. So, let's crank up the time machine and set it for late 19th century China, a land simmering with rage, ripe for rebellion, and about to explode in a glorious shitstorm. All right, let's start with the big picture. China in the late 1800s is not having a good time. The Qing Dynasty, the ruling dynasty for over 250 years, is on its last legs. Corruption is rampant, the economy's in the toilet, and foreign powers are treating the country like their personal playground. Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, and the US are all busy shoving their way in, setting up trade zones, and forcing China to sign a series of humiliating treaties. The Opium Wars have left a nasty scar, and the Chinese people? They're pissed. Like, burn it all down levels of pissed. Enter the Boxers. Officially, they called themselves the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. Yeah, that's a mouthful, so people just started calling them the Boxers because, well, they practiced martial arts. Think of them as kung fu warriors with a side of religious fanaticism. The Boxers believed in a mix of traditional Chinese mysticism and straight-up magical thinking. They thought that through rituals, chants, and martial arts training, they could summon the power to become bulletproof. Spoiler, they weren't, but that didn't stop them from giving it their all. So, what's the Boxers' beef? In short, foreign imperialism and Christian missionaries. The foreign powers were carving China into spheres of influence, exploiting its resources, and acting like entitled pricks. Meanwhile, Christian missionaries were converting locals and clashing with traditional Chinese customs, creating a cultural shitstorm. By the late 1890s, the Boxers had had enough. They started attacking foreigners, Chinese Christians, and anyone else they saw as collaborators. At first, the Qing government was like, hey, don't do that. But as the movement grew, Empress Dowager Cixi, the badass, if a bit shady, ruler of China, realized she could use the Boxers to her advantage. In 1900, shit hits the fan. The Boxers march on Beijing, chanting spells, waving swords, and looking like they've stepped straight out of a kung fu movie. They start targeting the legation quarter, where all the foreign diplomats, soldiers, and missionaries are holed up. Now imagine this. A bunch of Europeans and Americans, trapped in a walled-off district, surrounded by thousands of Boxers who want them dead. It's a siege straight out of a horror movie, complete with desperate gunfights, makeshift defenses, and a constant sense of, we're so fucked. The foreigners band together in a rare display of cooperation, but let's not kid ourselves. They're only working together because survival's on the line. British soldiers are fortifying buildings, American Marines are shooting anything that moves, and missionaries are praying like their lives depend on it. Spoiler, they do. Meanwhile, the Qing government officially declares war on the foreign powers, throwing their army into the mix. If the situation wasn't already a clusterfuck, now it's a full-blown shit show. The foreign powers, now known as the Eight-Nation Alliance, scramble to send reinforcements. This alliance includes Britain, the US, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. Yeah, it's like the Avengers, but everyone hates each other and just wants their slice of China. By the time the alliance's troops arrive, Beijing is a goddamn war zone. The Boxers are fighting like maniacs, convinced their bulletproof magic will save them. It doesn't. The Qing soldiers are adding to the chaos, and the foreign troops are mowing down anything that moves. The siege of the legation quarter lasts 55 days. When the Eight-Nation Alliance finally breaks through, they unleash holy hell on Beijing. Looting, pillaging, and outright massacres become the order of the day. The foreign troops act like they've just unlocked cheat codes, and the city suffers for it. So, what's the aftermath? For the Boxers, it's a goddamn nightmare. Their rebellion is crushed, and the foreign powers impose the Boxer Protocol, a treaty so humiliating it makes the Treaty of Versailles look like a love letter. China is forced to pay massive reparations, execute Boxer leaders, and allow foreign troops to station themselves in Beijing. The Qing Dynasty limps along for another decade before collapsing in 1911, and the Boxers become a cautionary tale of how not to start a rebellion. But here's the kicker. The Boxer Rebellion wasn't just some random uprising. It was a desperate, rage-fueled attempt to push back against centuries of exploitation, humiliation, and cultural erasure. The Boxers weren't heroes or villains. They were people trying to claw back some semblance of control in a world that had gone to shit. The Siege of the Legations, Beijing, 1900. The air is thick with smoke, the acrid sting of gunpowder mingling with the sickly sweet stench of rotting corpses. It's high summer in Beijing, and the sun beats down relentlessly, turning the city into a blistering furnace. Inside the foreign legation quarter, it's worse. Much worse. Rats scurry over bloated bodies that bake in the heat, the ground too parched and hard to bury the dead. Flies swarm like clouds, crawling over the living and the lifeless alike. Children cry, their wails weaker with each passing day, their bellies empty, save for the scraps of food the adults can spare, if there's any left at all. Water is rationed, dirty and brackish, barely enough to keep anyone alive. At the barricades, a motley crew of diplomats, soldiers, missionaries, and civilians clutch their weapons, most of them amateurs who've never fired a shot before this nightmare. Their hands shake, not just from hunger, but from the unrelenting fear. The Boxers are out there, tens of thousands of them, wild-eyed zealots armed with swords, spears, and an unshakable belief that they're invincible to bullets. And then, as if on cue, the chanting begins. Low at first, guttural and eerie, like a growl rolling up from the earth itself. It grows louder, closer, thousands of voices blending into a cacophony that makes the hair on your neck stand up. They call themselves the Righteous and Harmonious Fists, but they look like demons, smeared in dirt and blood, their movements erratic and fevered. Suddenly, the screaming starts. Not from the Boxers, but from within the legation walls. A rocket hisses through the air and slams into a building, exploding in a shower of flame and debris. People scatter, dragging the wounded, their faces streaked with soot and tears. And still, the Boxers come. Like waves crashing against a cliff, they throw themselves at the barricades, screaming prayers and curses in the same breath. Gunshots crack in response, sharp and deafening. The defenders fire wildly, their aim desperate, their ammunition dwindling with every pull of the trigger. This isn't war, it's slaughter. But on which side? For 55 days, this hellscape is life for the foreigners and Chinese Christians trapped in the legation quarter. They are surrounded, outnumbered, and slowly being starved into submission. Every hour is a gamble. Every moment could be their last. And outside, the streets of Beijing are drowning in blood. The failed march of the Seymour expedition, June 1900. Imagine this. A column of 2,000 soldiers trudging through the stifling summer heat of northern China. They're a patchwork force: British, American, Russian, French, Japanese, German, Italian, and Austro-Hungarian troops, each one armed to the teeth and fueled by confidence that their modern weaponry and civilized tactics will make quick work of the so-called Boxers. They're led by Vice Admiral Edward Seymour, a man whose stiff upper lip is about to be tested by the reality of guerrilla warfare on a scale he never expected. Their mission? March from the port city of Tianjin to Beijing, a trek of about 120 miles, to rescue the foreigners trapped in the legation quarter. Sounds straightforward, right? Except nothing about this disaster in the making is straightforward. At first, the column moves confidently, arrogantly even, believing they'll meet little resistance. They have Maxim guns, artillery, and the discipline of professional armies. Their first few encounters with the Boxers are laughably one-sided. These zealots, charging with swords and farm tools, are mowed down in waves by disciplined rifle volleys and machine gun fire. Seymour's men smirk as the bodies pile up, but as they press deeper into the countryside, the smirks fade. The terrain changes. Villages once bustling with life are eerily deserted. Boxers don't engage in open fields anymore. They melt into the landscape, hiding in forests and hills, striking the column in ambushes, then vanishing before anyone can retaliate. And then the railway, their lifeline, turns into their death trap. The column relies on the tracks to move supplies and artillery, but the Boxers are one step ahead. They rip up rails, destroy bridges, and sabotage telegraph lines, leaving Seymour's men stranded in enemy territory without communication or reinforcements. The railcars that carried supplies become useless hulks, abandoned on the broken tracks. Food and water begin to run low. The men, most of whom aren't used to the suffocating humidity of a Chinese summer, start to drop from heat stroke. The horses fare no better, collapsing mid-march, their bodies swelling and rotting in the sun. Supplies that seemed ample at the start now look pathetically inadequate. The ambushes grow more frequent, more coordinated. The Boxers, once thought of as untrained fanatics, prove to be cunning adversaries. They're joined by Qing soldiers, regulars from the Chinese Imperial Army who've officially thrown their weight behind the rebellion. What began as skirmishes turns into all-out battles, with the coalition forces firing blindly into the countryside as they're peppered with musket balls and cannon fire from unseen enemies. At Langfang, the column faces its darkest moment. The Boxers and Qing soldiers unleash hell, attacking from every side. The foreigners dig in around the railway station, desperately trying to hold their ground. Bullets rip through the air, men scream in agony, and smoke chokes the battlefield. The Maxim guns roar, cutting down dozens, but it's not enough. The Boxers just keep coming, wave after wave, screaming their war cries as they fall. Seymour's column is forced to retreat, abandoning wounded men and supplies in their haste. The rescue mission has turned into a fight for survival. They limp back toward Tianjin, bloodied and humiliated, their dreams of a quick victory shattered. By the time they stagger into safety, they've lost hundreds of men, killed, wounded, or captured. Seymour himself is grim-faced, the weight of failure heavy on his shoulders. The Boxers, meanwhile, celebrate their triumph, emboldened by their success against what was supposed to be the best-trained military force on the planet. The failed march of the Seymour expedition is a stark reminder. This is not a simple rebellion. This is a war, and it's going to be a bloody, drawn-out fight to the bitter end. So, what's the legacy of the Boxer Rebellion? On one hand, it's a tragic story of misplaced faith and brutal oppression. On the other, it's a reminder of the lengths people will go to when they've had enough of being fucked over. The Boxers didn't win, but their rebellion sparked conversations about imperialism, cultural identity, and the limits of human endurance. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth remembering. Thanks for tuning in to this week's Time Machine Diaries. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's madness, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends. Next week, we're tackling another insane chapter of the past. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and for God's sake, don't believe anyone who tells you they're immune to bullets.
唧唧复唧唧，木兰当户织。不闻机杼声，惟闻女叹息。问女何所思？问女何所忆？